This goes back about 15 years, and you can see perhaps in terms of palette a bit more of a traditional landscape feeling with the tree-like forms again. Again, another long one that was in the last show in New York. Just this area of red is this big, so that gives you an idea of the scale. It's a big, big painting. I want to pair this painting of mine next to a 17th century Dutch painting by Ruisdael, one of the great landscape painters. And really just to show you the notion of bending space, I like to talk about bending space again, like fragrance or other words that you can apply to a painting. The way I try to bend space is sometimes to either create a concave feeling or a convex feeling. And in these painters, it was often convex, like a cereal bowl turned upside down. The way they do it often is through lights and darks. And the light, it almost feels like there's a hand behind the painting pushing it out in the middle. I love that notion of that bulging feeling, which often you would see in some of these, the way that these paintings were lit. I did the similar thing in this painting of mine, and it just simply gradating the intensity till it peaks in the center, and then getting darker and duller as you go off to the edges. So almost the reverse of going into the middle, you're coming out the middle, which pushes the edges back. That idea of bending. And I very much look at Dutch painting. This is a close-up of a large painting. I want to talk about the notion of speed. You don't think of the time or speed when you think of a painting. A painting is a plastic object, as Mondrian calls it, a plastic art. The way that I think about speed is the speed of the marks, and I can very much control or regulate that. If you notice, for instance, like this line right here is very broken and fractured in terms of color and texture. Very denuded, very chunky and broken. Then if you look at this kind of gray-blue line, it's more intact and it's a little faster. It takes you from this point to that point quicker because it's more uniform. Whereas here, you're forced to sort of negotiate a little and dawdle and go a little slower, which also forces you to remain in these areas a little longer. So as painters, there are little things we can do to affect speed, the speed that your eye reads certain passages of the painting. If I want to suggest you to stay in one area a little longer, I'll change the speed of the mark. And it's something I think about in terms of rhythm. Rhythm is important in a painting. I played drums for 30 years. I don't really as much anymore. But when I paint, I'm thinking about percussion, about the way that I apply color in a percussive way and creating rhythm. Thomas Gainsborough, one of my great teachers at the College of Charleston, Michael Tyzak, and I shared a love of bourbon and jazz music and Thomas Gainsborough. 1727 to 1788. You know these paintings. These are the ones he was famous for. He was really a landscape painter at heart, but he did these paintings as well. I love the notion of the composition. I love the sort of diamond shape of the body and the structure of the body, all emanating from the point of the toe in this very artificially lit foreground. And that word artificial is very important to me in a painting. It doesn't feel like a real landscape. It feels like a stage set or something artificial. It's lit artificially almost. It almost feels like from stage lights are lighting this. And then he has that inimitable fluid brushstroke that he was so good at. And he was known for mixing disparate mediums and charcoal and paint, many things together, experimenting with his mediums. And then if you look at some of the landscapes that he did in Bath, like these. And he would often start them with, he would take the equivalent of salad tongs, squeeze a big sponge and dip it into a pot of black or umber, and then mush it onto the canvas, creating these diaphanous, amorphous darks. And that's often the way, as I mentioned before, that I start a painting, is just big mushy darks. Here, and perhaps somewhere else, maybe in the sky, even though it's not there evident anymore. And it creates a sense of weight and density and landscape, the good earth, the heavy earth. I want to talk about the way that the temporal way that I construct the paintings is often a top-down approach. Starting at the top, generally thinner layers, and then as I work my way down in steps, each successive layer slightly overlaps the one before. So by the time you get to the bottom, the paint is thicker and heavier and closer to you, as if you're standing at the bottom of a staircase. The bottom one is right at your feet, and then it goes up and away as you go back. Think of stairs that way. And what it does is suggest the orientation that we live in the world, that there's the bottom down here, and the top goes away from us. Again, very tied to landscape, to the way that we view landscape. If you invert that, as in this Marsden Hartley, he takes the scale and the proximity of these shapes and puts the heaviest, closest ones at the top, the clouds, and then the information at the bottom is further away, which creates a sense of disorder, disquiet, like if you took a staircase and turned it on its butt, opposite, like the top is going to fall down on your head, which I think is really interesting in a painting. Just a nice way to look at that idea in Marsden Hartley. Irish Celtic art. In 1997, I had the honor of a Fulbright scholarship, and I chose to go to Ireland. I love Irish poetry. I was interested in Irish Celtic art, and also the notion of the landscape, which is so very tied to Irish identity. I had an apartment in Dublin, and I had a studio inside the Irish Museum of Modern Art, so I would go back and forth between those two. And after I'd paint for a couple of days, I would have a backpack with a toothbrush and change of clothes, and I would just get on a bus and go until I felt like getting off the bus and just walk and meet people, and I hitchhiked, and it was great. I drew and painted and just soaked that experience in. And like Southern identity, Irish identity is very much tied to location, to place. In terms of Irish Celtic art, the period I was more interested in was called Litton style, T-E-N-E, marked by these beautiful spirals and zigzags and rosettes, very compact, highly abstracted shapes, often in a small scale. Usually 600 to 400 BC is the year on these. And again, another example of Celtic art in the natural setting, the landscape in the background. So you would just be walking in a field and come up on the Turo stone in this case, and these beautiful abstracted, florid, vegetal shapes. Very, very, like talking about the marking of location right there. Centuries just plunked down right there. Some of the Neolithic things, these concentric, circles and lines, dating back to the pyramids, the Egyptian pyramids, 2500 BC. One of the things I loved a lot about Irish Celtic art is that it has that springy line, that expanding, contracting vitality of line. One of the most salient moments in that year in Ireland was toward the end of the Fulbright. I was walking through a field in County Cavan, and it was hot and sunny, and I was sketching, and I needed to dip down and dip my face like in a little stream to cool off. And I dipped my face about this far, about like the azaleas, about to my ears. And I just felt that gurgling coldness rushing around my face, and then I felt the hot sun on the back. And it felt like I was in two places at the same time, one in the real dry world up here, and then in this gurgling liquid world down there. And I was in the middle of those two. And that to me is, a coalescence occurred of many ideas I had been thinking about in painting, as painting the mediator. Painting is the middle point. It's the negotiator between this world, the physical world, and the interior world. I think beautifully summed up in that moment, that personal moment. So it clarified a lot of things for me. Then when I came back in 1998, you can see sort of that oval shape referring to that experience, the shape of the face, or the shape of the lens of the eye. Or in Celtic art, you'll often see that oval shape, a sacred shape. And then all these landscape elements sort of pressing in and out of that. And this about 10 years after that experience, you can still see that intact shape there as well. And very weathery, this one, very Irish. It changes every 15 minutes. Sheets and sheets of color and movement and light.